Those are where the solutions lie, not undermining the health, well-being, and future of our women and our children and America's prosperity. I now yield the floor back to my colleague from California.
Thank you very much. Mr. President, Senator Mikulski has asked that
Senator from California.
Thank you so much. Senator Mikulski has asked that I control the time for our side, so I will stay on the floor. What time does that time expire?
Senator controls 37 and a half more minutes.
Thank you very much. Mr. President, I'm here today to speak out along with my colleagues for the women and children in our nation who would be gravely harmed by the House budget, H.R. 1. Mr. President, I hope we get the chance to vote on that House budget, because I think the American people need to look at what's going on with my Republican friends who are in charge of the House of Representatives. Now, we all know we need to reduce the deficit, but we also know the right way to do it. We did it with President Bill Clinton. We did it with a mix of revenue raisers and smart cuts, plus investments that paid dividends. We did it in such a way that we actually had a surplus at the end of the day and 23 million new jobs. When George W. Bush took over, the surplus was gone and the job creation was gone. Compared to 23 million new jobs under President George W. Bush, there were 1 million jobs created, and he left us with soaring deficits and the deepest recession since the Great Depression. That's a story. It has a beginning, a middle, and we're about to write the end. And I will be honest, I will stand with my colleagues on both sides of the aisle who are willing to fight for the people of this country and the middle class of this country. The budget bill, H.R. 1, would destroy, according to leading experts, 700,000 jobs, hurt our families, and to me, this is my personal opinion, it looks like a political vendetta against women, children, and a healthy environment that they rely on, because they need to breathe clean air and drink clean water, and all this is on the chopping block there. Let's look at Title 10 Family Planning Program. What does Title 10 do? And it's zeroed out. Is that right? Zeroed out in H.R. 1, the House Republican budget. Title 10 provides contraceptive services for 4.7 million women nationwide, almost 5 million women nationwide. It helps prevent almost 1 million unintended pregnancies. Now, here are my friends on the other side joining with us. We're all saying, let us make sure that we cut down on the number of abortions. What is one proven way to do it? Contraception. They would prevent almost 1 million people from getting that kind of a service. Now, in my state, Planned Parenthood operates 800 health care centers nationwide. I know my colleague is very aware of health centers. They provide, in my state, 720,000 breast exams nationwide, 730,000 Pap tests. What does this mean? Mr. President, hundreds of thousands of women just in California and millions nationwide go to Planned Parenthood to make sure that they don't have breast cancer, that they don't have cervical cancer, that they don't have an STD, that they don't have AIDS, and if, God forbid, it turns out they have any of these things, they can get cured. Without this, they're in deep trouble. Everyone in America knows early detection is where it's at. So if I say the impact of the Republican budget will mean more abortions, more breast cancer, more cervical cancer, more STDs, more AIDS that's untreated, that is not hyperbole. That is not an overstatement. That is a fact. So, I want to talk about Nicole Sandoval from Pasadena, California. She wrote to me and she said, please support Planned Parenthood because, by the way, our colleagues eliminate Planned Parenthood getting $1 of federal funding. What are they implying? That the funds are used for abortion services. That is an outright lie. Since the 70s, the Hyde Amendment has said not one penny of federal funds may be used for abortion, providing abortions. So they know that's an untruth, and yet they let it hang out there. The money Planned Parenthood gets is for just what I said: cancer prevention, sexually transmitted disease prevention, and contraception. So what does Nicole say? She was 23 years old, she had no insurance. Planned Parenthood was there for her and caught her cervical cancer early enough to save her life. So I stand with Nicole Sandoval. I'm here to stand with Leah Gerard from Torrance. She wrote to me about a horrific incident in which a member of her family was raped. This young woman went to Planned Parenthood. She didn't know where else to go. She wrote and said, Planned Parenthood directed her family member to the local hospital, got in touch with the local sexual assault nurse examiner, contacted her family to come and take care of her. Had she not gone to Planned Parenthood, she truly, she writes, would not have survived that experience. And I stand with Leah and her family and with Planned Parenthood. Zero out Planned Parenthood? Where are we going? We're certainly not going forward. We're going back. I remember the years that George Herbert Walker Bush was on the board of Planned Parenthood. Planned Parenthood is a bipartisan operation. If you walk in the door, they don't ask whether you're a Democrat, Republican, registered vote, who you are. You get taken care of. And the community is healthier. Now, in the remaining time, I want to talk about the attack on the environment that women and children have to live in. The attack on the Environmental Protection Agency is the biggest cut of any agency in the federal government by our Republican friends over in the House. 70% of the American people say the Environmental Protection Agency should do its job. 69% think EPA should update Clean Air Act standards with stricter air pollution limits. 68% believe Congress should not stop EPA from enforcing Clean Air Act standards. 69% believe that EPA scientists, not Congress, should set pollution standards. Look at this. Mr. President, in this tough time when the country is divided, almost 70% of our people say, leave EPA alone. But oh no, our Republican friends whacked that agency by one-third, billions of dollars. And not only that, instruct that agency with riders telling them they can't enforce air pollution standards for soot. And we know what happens when you're exposed to soot. And we're looking at other exposures as well. Small particulate matter, which gets in our lungs, is lodged in our lungs. They say we can't look at cement manufacturing and go after the mercury that comes out of those firms. The mercury, arsenic. Do we think the American people want dirtier air? Is that what the election was about? I would challenge. I just came out of a tough election. And I have to tell you, not one person ever came up to me and said, please, I want more soot. I really need more smog. It's missing out of my life. And oh my God, when my kid drinks water out of the tap, I want them to get contaminated. Forget it. That's not what the election was about. The election was about jobs, jobs, jobs. Okay, let's look at a child that pays the price when the air is dirty. Our children, their exposure to air pollution causes asthma attacks, lost days of school, emergency room visits, and for the older people, heart attacks, stroke, cancer, and premature death. According to the American Lung Association, we have another beautiful picture of a child there that I'd like to show. Asthma is one of the most common chronic disorders in children. It affects 7 million children. Here's another beautiful baby here. I'm showing you this as a grandma. And I'm going to take another 2 minutes and then turn it over to Senator Shaheen. Look at this picture. Look at this face. Look at those eyes. I want to say to our friends in the House, what are you doing? You are throwing women and children under the bus. You're throwing the middle class under the bus. And I, for one, I'm going to tell the truth. During my campaign, the press would always say, what are you going to do to win? Such a terrible year for Democrats. How are you going to win? I said, I have a secret plan. They said, what is it? Well, I'm going to tell the truth. You know? I'm going to just lay it out there. Look, the truth is the EPA released a new report. It was asked for by Congress. Congress demanded to know the benefit of clean air law. You know what it did? They said in 2010 alone, 160,000 cases of premature deaths were avoided. Can you believe it? And they want to turn all of this back. The American Lung Association says H.R. 1 is toxic to the public health. Toxic to the public health. And they say it would result in millions of Americans, including kids and seniors and people with chronic diseases such as asthma, being forced to breathe air that's unhealthy. And it can cause asthma attacks, heart attacks, strokes, cancer, and shorten lives. So I'm just going to say this to my Republican friends. You know who signed the Clean Air Act? A Republican president. A Republican president. You know who set up the EPA? A Republican president, Richard Nixon. What are you doing over there? I already said George Herbert W. Bush, Walker Bush, was on the board of Planned Parenthood. Richard Nixon signed the Clean Air Act. So they don't seem to either have a sense of history or they have moved so far away from some of the proud traditions of their party that they have lost total touch. So in closing, let me say this. We're going to have to stop this war against women. We're going to have to stop this war against children. We're going to have to stop this war against the environment. We're going to come forward with deficit reduction that will equal what they do, but we will do it in a way that doesn't hurt job creation and that doesn't hurt our kids, our families, and the environment we all depend upon. And with that, it's my honor to yield to Senator Shaheen for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Senator Boxer.
Senator from New Hampshire.
Thank you very much, Senator Boxer, and thank you for your leadership, and thank you to Senator Mikulski for the work that she's done to organize us this afternoon to point out just what is being proposed by our colleagues in the other chamber. We need to address our long-term deficit. We all know that. We need to make some hard choices to balance the budget. But there's a right way and a wrong way to do that. And the right way to do that is to first look at things like eliminating the billions of dollars in duplicative programs that were identified just this week by the GAO. The wrong way is to address the deficit by doing what our colleagues in the House did when they slashed funding for services that are critical to middle-class families and our future prosperity. The House Republican budget cuts include a $1.1 billion cut to Head Start and Childcare. This is money that is critical to so many working families in New Hampshire and across the country. Let me just put it into perspective. A cut this size would mean that nationally, over 200,000 children would be kicked out of Head Start, and an additional 360,000 children would lose child care opportunities. Now, I have 3 daughters and 7 grandchildren. So I understand, like so many mothers do, just how difficult it is to juggle work and family obligations. And I appreciate how important it is for working parents to know that their children are being supervised by quality caregivers. I also understand that a working parent can be a productive member of the workforce only when they know that their children are safe. When I was governor, we asked for a report to be done on child care in the state of New Hampshire. And what we found in that report was that there's a direct result between quality child care and the productivity of their parents in the workforce. And child care is expensive. Quality child care can easily top $10,000 per child per year, an amount that's out of reach for so many working families who are trying just to make ends meet, especially in this economy. The unemployment rate in this country is 9%. We should be putting our focus on creating jobs today and helping to build a strong workforce for the future. The proposed budget that the House Republicans have done would do just the opposite. Research shows that quality child care and early childhood development is critical to preparing our children for tomorrow's jobs. We know that the first 5 years are the most important in the development of a child's brain. During these years, children develop their cognitive, social, emotional, and language skills that form a solid foundation for their lives. Economists point to the strong return on investment we get for intervention early in life. For every dollar we spend on quality early learning, we return up to $17. These same experts cite an increase in productivity, in workforce readiness, and in graduation rates among children who are in quality early childhood programs. In addition, they've also found out that for those children, there's a decrease in special education, in crime rates, in welfare dependency, and in other behavioral problems. So one of the things that really made me aware of this direct relationship was going to my first governor's conference after I got elected. And I heard a presentation on brain development. The presenters showed that the brain scan of a child who had quality early learning looked very different than the brain scan of those children who did not. And they showed a graph that demonstrated that the way a child's brain develops is inversely proportional to our investments. In other words, we're making the smallest investments in the years when it would make the most impact on how a child develops. This made such an impression on me that I went back home to New Hampshire and focused so much of my time as governor on the importance of early learning. When I became chair of the Education Commission of the States in my second term as governor, this became the top priority for me and for ECS. There's no doubt, we can look at all of the data. Helping working families afford quality childhood care and quality education programs has immediate and long-term benefits. And I urge my colleagues to reject the short-sighted, reckless cuts that have been made in the House Republican budget and instead invest in our future and the future of our children and families. Thank you very much, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Boxer. Mr. President.
Senator from North Carolina is recognized.
Thank you. Today, I also rise to speak for women and children across this country, but especially in my state in North Carolina. Prenatal and postnatal maternal care translates into healthy moms and healthy families. Children who receive well-child visits to their doctors and recommended immunizations live healthier lives. They can go to school and just be kids. But the House passed continuing resolution for the remainder of fiscal year 2011 makes draconian cuts to community health centers and the Title V Maternal Child Health Block Grant, two programs that are vital in reducing maternal and child mortality. If these cuts go through, nearly 4.5 million women and children under age 6 are at risk of losing care or not receiving care in their community health centers. Consider that community health centers account for 17% of all low-income births. But prenatal patients at health centers are much less likely to give birth to low birth weight babies compared to their counterparts nationally. And why? Because they are getting prenatal care. Moreover, rates of vaccination among children receiving regular care at a health center are uniformly higher than those of children with another source of care. With the House proposed cuts, pregnant women and children who rely on community health centers for care will be left with literally nowhere to turn to for health care. By slashing $50 million in funding from the Maternal Child Health Block Grant Program, the House bill would dramatically curtail services to the 35 million women and children across the country, including nearly 500,000 women and children in North Carolina who receive such services as newborn hearing screenings and postnatal care. In North Carolina, infants born to minorities are twice as likely to die as those born to Caucasians. However, a program called the Healthy Beginnings Program is working to reverse infant mortality and low birth weights among minorities. Healthy Beginnings provides case management, general health education, and other support for at-risk women throughout their pregnancy and until their child turns 2. In 3 years, this initiative has reduced infant mortality by 60% in participating communities. Also, early detection of permanent hearing loss is essential for children to progress at age-appropriate rates. Research shows that by the time a child with hearing loss graduates from high school, more than $400,000 can actually be saved in special education costs if that child is identified early and given appropriate education, medical, and audiological services. The North Carolina Early Hearing Detection Program was established in 1999 as a part of the state's Title V Maternal and Child Health Program. And since the establishment of this program, there's been a remarkable increase in the percentage of infants screened. All neonatal facilities in North Carolina offer initial newborn hearing screenings. And in 2009, 96% of infants completed these screenings, over about 100,000 children. And of these, 450 children actually received hearing aids and some a cochlear implant through a contract funded by a Maternal and Child Health Block Grant. And I heard from 3 of the families in North Carolina, all whose children failed the screening test. And their stories were truly heart-wrenching as they described their hours-old babies not being able to hear. But in all 3 of these families, the hearing loss was detected as part of the newborn screening. And immediately these children were provided with follow-up, with hearing aids, and a cochlear implant, some of them. And as a result of these programs, each of these families, the child is ahead of their peers verbally. There are just 2 critical programs that I've mentioned that are funded by the Title V Maternal and Child Health Block Grant. As you can see, these are not just statistics, but real women and kids and families who benefit from this important program. And I strongly believe that we've got to work together to get our country back on solid fiscal ground. I'm very much concerned about this and want to work on that. But the path we are on is obviously unsustainable. In fact, I was one of the senators who advocated for the creation of the Bowles-Simpson Fiscal Commission. But our fiscal challenges require a thoughtful, bipartisan solution that gets us on the right track and encourages economic growth. These cuts are simply counterproductive. We cannot balance the budget on the backs of our nation's future, our children. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Senator from California.
I want to thank Senator Hagan for her remarks. She is really one of the leaders here in finding solutions to the deficit that don't kill jobs and do deficit reduction in the right way. And I just wanted to thank her and her making the point that when we attack kids and pregnant women, at the end of the day, it's morally reprehensible, but in addition to that, it costs money. I mean, I think that point was made beautifully. It's an honor to yield 10 minutes to a great colleague, Senator Maria Cantwell from Washington State. 10 minutes.
Thank you.
Senator from Washington.
Thank you, and I thank the gentlewoman from California for her leadership and for her articulation on the floor earlier about the rider that is on H.R. 1 that would really undo what the Supreme Court said that EPA should do, which is to make sure that the Clean Air Act is enforced. And I thought the senator from California's comments about no one in California asking her that they wanted more smut was a very profound statement, because that's really what people are saying when they try to do a rider, is to say, EPA, don't enforce the law that the Supreme Court told you to enforce. It is as if you are jamming down small children across the country air and air quality that is something that is less than sufficient. And we know that. We know that because it's based on science. And that's what EPA has said, and that's what the Supreme Court has said that they should enforce. And yet, here we are in the midst of all of this. The solution to our economy is to have a rider on legislation basically saying don't enforce what the Supreme Court says is the Clean Air Act. So I thank the senator from California for her leadership on this issue. And I come to the floor to join my other colleagues today because I think the American people have sent a clear message. They want us to focus on creating jobs, promoting innovation, and putting people back to work. And that's what we're trying to do here in the United States Senate. But in the House, the Republicans seem like they are saying, let's cut programs and vital services to working women and families, and somehow that will generate economic growth. Well, Mr. President, instead of creating jobs, all they have done is launched a war on women. And H.R. 1 that they are proposing would eliminate funding for Title X, which would provide health services including family planning and breast and cervical cancer screening and preventive health, and certainly would impact low-income women. And it doesn't create jobs. There's nothing in what I just said in the cutting of that would create jobs. How are jobs created out of cutting those services? It's actually an attack on the access to health care. And when you don't have healthy people, I guarantee you, Mr. President, you end up with bad economic consequences. The bill also cuts funding for teen pregnancy prevention programs and federal funding for Planned Parenthood centers that service more than 3 million women each year, jeopardizing, again, access to critical health preventive services. Just in the state of Washington, we have 39 centers and serve over 130,000 patients annually and administer over 170,000 tests for sexually transmitted infections. And one of my constituents, who was diagnosed at 22 years old with abnormal growth on her cervix wall, came to a Planned Parenthood clinic. Why? Because she didn't have health insurance. In fact, quoting her, she said, I have not had a scheduled exam. I would not have had a scheduled exam on my own. Without Planned Parenthood, I may have died or lost my ability to have children in the future. And aside from these personal effects, as an uninsured student, I would have been a huge financial burden on my family and on my community. There it is, Mr. President. Planned Parenthood has been effective in preventing over 40,000 pregnancies and diverting $160 million back to the state, which we need in these tough economic times. So instead of supporting women and families so they can be productive parts of our economy, Republicans are continuing to turn the clock back on what are hard-fought accesses to healthy service by attacking a women's right to choose. Their proposal would deny women using flexible spending accounts or from using pre-tax dollars for insurance to cover their wide range of reproductive choices, deny small businesses their tax credits if they choose employee health care coverage that includes reproductive health care, and would disallow tax deductions for health insurance for the self-employed if insurance included reproductive health care choice. So the Republicans' answer to the economy is attack reproductive health care. It seems to me that these proposals are really just about attacking the most vulnerable in our society, including the elderly, where you would have an impact on services for elderly, including meals and housing and employment services. And these are women that comprise two-thirds of our elderly, and they would be harmed most by these cuts. For example, Mr. President, in 2009, 25% of all families with children were female head of households, and 78% of mothers with children between the ages of 6 and 7 were in the labor force. So that's a big percentage. Therefore, cutting programs that support working mothers, like job training, like child care, like education, like health care, will impact those families' ability to be productive members of our economy. I personally don't understand why in the world at this point in time, with this high of unemployment rate, we would ever cut the job training programs. I can tell you I travel the state of Washington, and I constantly hear, even in these high economic times, employers who can't find the workforce that they need to do the jobs. And when you think about that, when a company can't find the workforce that it needs because there's a skills gap, that's holding that company back from producing higher revenues, from meeting their goals, and from adding stimulus to the economy, all because they can't find the workforce. And yet we here in the Senate are trying to promote workforce training and to have programs that have been tested successes like the Workforce Investment Act that are investing for every dollar invested by the Workforce Investment Act, it's $10 in stimulating more in our economy. So it's a 1 to 10 ratio. Why would we cut such a program? And in Washington State, over 78% of those job seekers who have found jobs have been, I should say, of the workforce centers, 78% of the workforce centers end up finding jobs, so it's a very high percentage of helping people and placing them. I just look at this example of this big decision we just had with Boeing on winning the refueling tanker decision. Here we are with 11,000 jobs in Washington State and a supply chain that is going to also have more jobs created. And yet, if we don't make an investment in workforce investment, that supply chain won't be able to find the people to fill those jobs to help fulfill this contract. Now, here we are, something that is as big as a $35 billion contract that we're involved in because it's the Department of Defense, and yet on the same side, the Republicans are over in the House saying, let's cut the Workforce Investment Act, even though we know we have a plane to deliver, even though we know it has a military purpose that we support, and yet we're going to say, let's cut programs because somehow that is going to make our economy healthier. Well, I can give you an example. General Plastics would not have been able to keep its current staff level or grow its business in the past year without the help of workforce investment dollars. They were in partner with Tacoma Community College and trained a workforce in the improvement and techniques that allowed the company to streamline its production and grow its business effectively. And during this last year, they grew 10 to 15% and became more competitive. They also added about 22 new employees because of additional new businesses. And these are programs that would be cut by the proposal in H.R. 1 that the House Republicans are trying to push. I don't think it would improve our economy. I think it would stall what is a very, very fragile recovery. Workforce development is economic development. And when people are trained and skilled, the employers get what they need, the community prospers, and everybody truly wins in what the President has called for, winning the future. So I think we need to make sure that we here in the Senate stand up and say no to these cuts, like the Workforce Investment Act, like in family health, like the cuts in the Pell Grant program, which would cut by more than $800 per student, or the Head Start or Early Start that, again, would impact thousands of children in Washington State. In addition, we should not cut what are the healthy elements of our economy, but make sure that we are helping women and families do what will help them survive and help them help us with an economic recovery. Mr. President, I know some people think this is the way to get our economy going again, but I can tell you our economy certainly in 2008 hit the iceberg. But what H.R. 1 does, instead of saying women and children first, they are basically cutting them off of the lifeline that they need and cutting off what are essential programs to help us grow jobs and have a healthy economy. I thank the President. I yield the floor.
Mr. President,
Senator from California.
after consulting with my friends Senator Collins and Senator Sessions, we're running a little late, so I would give Senator Lautenberg until 6 minutes after the hour and then add 6 minutes to the time of the Republicans.
Without objection.
Okay. He's recognized then, please.
Mr. President.
Senator from New Jersey.
Mr. President, I hope it's that it's noted that I stand here as the male member with my colleagues who comprise the significant part of the women members of the United States Senate. They do the mothering, they do the family raising, but it's pretty obvious to all of us that fathers, grandfathers have a active interest in what happens with our children, what it takes to make sure that they grow up healthfully, that they grow up with the tools that they'll need in their future lives, for them to contribute to themselves, their families, and the country at large. Mr. President, what we're witnessing in America today is an assault by House Republicans trying to ram through a reckless, unhealthy spending plan that will ultimately bring shame to our country as it causes pain now for little children who come from families that don't have the means, that don't have the stability of family life in many cases, that will give them an opportunity to establish themselves with a cycle that will bring them to successful lives later on, to be able to hold jobs of significance and create a family environment. It's hard when we look at this to figure out what the mission is. Now, Mr. President, I come from the business community, and I've been here a lot of years, 27, but I spent 30 years in the business community, and I learned something. I learned something about financial statements, and I learned that you have to sometimes cut costs here or there, and that sometimes you have to make investments so that you can expand. You can expand your business. You can make it more competitive, more leaderly. So as we look at the plan that's being offered for cut, it causes us to rethink what's taking place, to think outside the box, as they say. There's a lot of applause for cutting costs. There's a whole group of people in the who have targets for cost cutting that will leave America without the tools in the future to remain competitive and to remain a place where great things can happen. Why is that? A lot of it is because they're cutting education programs. Head Start, for one thing. Now, Head Start, I think every United States senator ought to pledge to take a trip through a Head Start facility, see what it's like. See what it's like when you have children even 1 and 2 years old in the early Head Start program, or 3, 4, 5, and later in the full Head Start program. See the enthusiasm that exists with these children. And I have an indication. This card, it was Valentine's Day when I went into a city called Perth Amboy in New Jersey, and oddly enough, the city of Perth Amboy is where the first signature on the Bill of Rights was made, in New Jersey. Bill of Rights. And here's an opportunity that's certainly a right, and that is to be able to learn. And I get notes from these children, flattering, by the way, and not because of my looks, but because they say here, dear Representative, we love coming to school. We learn languages. We can be scientists. We can be artists. We can be authors, illustrators. We can be lifetime learners. And they talk in less precise handwriting. They talk about how nice it is to be able to come to school. They talk about the design makes a little tougher presentation. Dear Mr. Representative, we love our preschool class. We learn to write. We explore science. We explore changing things in the world. We love to be here in school. And we love it when they're there, Mr. President, because we know not only are their lives going to be improved substantially, but also they're going to be contributing citizens to the society that we live in. It's amazing and often neglected. I ask for some indication of what happens in head school. First of all those children are beautiful. I never saw so many beautiful children in my life. Now, I'm a professional grandfather. I have 13 grandchildren. My wife brought 3 to the marriage, and I had 10. And what I learned, and I see it, there's nothing like seeing a 1.5-year-old learning, a 2.5-year-old, a 2-year-old learning. And what they find out is by age 1, most children begin linking words to meanings. They understand the names used to label familiar objects, body parts, arms, legs, animals, people. At about 18 months, Madam President, children add new words to their vocabulary at the astounding rate of 1 every 2 hours. By age 2, most children have a vocabulary of several hundred words and can form simple sentences such as go out or traditional all gone. Between 24 to 30 months, children speak in longer sentences. From 30 to 36 months, kids can usually recite the alphabet and count from 1 to 10. And the fact is that they are learning something. By kindergarten, kids are beginning to turn pages in the book, and they start learning to read by about 5 years of age. And there's a real reward for the country when they do that. Our society receives nearly $9 in benefits for every dollar invested in Head Start children. It leads to increased achievement and lots of good things. And I learned a little bit the hard way, Mr. President, about what Head Start means. When I and a business partner of mine went back to a school that we went to as kids, we went to the 6th grade and offered a scholarship program to kids in to youngsters in the 6th grade to pick up a large part of their college tuition, 28 young people in our class, that we would contribute, again, a large part of their college tuition if they were accepted at any one of 30 colleges picked at random. And we had counselors. We brought them down here. I was able to take them on a visit to the White House, where Vice President Dan Quayle was very generous with his time, and took them to the company that I was running so they could see that. So not one of them passed the...
Senator, all time that is dedicated to the majority has expired.
Madam President, we say all time. Is there no time left on our side for presentation? Well, I'll wrap this up very quickly, if I might, just a couple words.
Is there an objection to the senator continuing?
If the senator is truly going to wrap it up, I don't object. Thank you.
Thank you. I thank my
Without objection.
Colleague and friend from Maine. Very simply, that we now see what the problem was. We analyzed it thoroughly. The problem was we started too late. In the 6th grade, it was too late to get a learning habit. And now when we see these little tots and how quickly they learn, how quickly they talk, and how quickly they adapt. And so, Madam President, I ask unanimous consent that the my full speech be included in the record. And with that, I thank my colleague from Maine for the courtesy, and I yield the floor.
Senator from Maine.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, I rise to express my deep concern that the Senate has yet to consider the Defense Appropriations Bill for fiscal year 2011. As the presiding officer is well aware, we should have completed work on this bill and every other appropriations bill before October 1st of last year. But with the Department of Defense, this is becoming increasingly problematic. For this reason, Madam President, along with 2 members of the Republican leadership, Senator Alexander and Senator Barrasso, I have filed an amendment to the patent reform bill that would fund the Department of Defense for the remainder of this fiscal year. Now, Madam President, just think what we have done the last 3 weeks. We took up an FAA reauthorization bill, then we went on recess for a week, and now we're on a patent reform bill. Now, Madam President, I don't mean to suggest that FAA and patent reform are not important. Certainly we could have gone without having a recess, but both of those bills pale in comparison to the urgency of providing our servicemen and women with the resources that they need to carry out their mission. Secretary Gates, Admiral Mullen, and other military leaders have repeatedly and clearly warned us about the dangers of failing to pass a full-year defense funding bill. It is hurting our national security and harming our readiness. Secretary Gates put it bluntly, saying, quote, "The continuing resolution represents a crisis at our doorstep," end quote. Deputy Secretary of Defense William Lynn testified that a year-long CR will damage national security. Madam President, in no time in recent memory has Congress failed to pass a defense appropriations bill. Even when there was a year-long continuing resolution for most of the government during fiscal year 2007, the Congress passed a separate bill funding the Department of Defense. With troops in harm's way, now is not the time to break with that precedent. If we do not provide the authority for the Air Force to buy unmanned aerial vehicles to fly combat air patrols over Afghanistan, the fighting there will not be halted until we do so. If we do not act to provide the $150 million that has been requested to meet the very specific and urgent requirements of our special forces, we will be failing those who are truly on the front lines. Secretary Gates has made it clear Military readiness will suffer because of fewer flying hours for our pilots, fewer steaming days for our ships, and cutbacks in training for home-stationed forces. A full-year CR will also delay much-needed modernization of our military equipment. This would come at a time when our Navy is at its smallest size since 1916, and at a time when the aircraft in our Air Force inventory are older than at any time since the Air Force was created. The Navy will not be able to procure a second Virginia-class submarine nor DDG-51 destroyers needed to keep costs down and to achieve the minimum size fleet, 313 ships, that the Navy has stated is the absolute minimum. Operating under a full-year CR also means that the taxpayers are going to end up paying more for less. The Navy would likely have to renegotiate some of its procurements. The Army has already shut down work on the Stryker mobile gun system and likely will incur additional costs to restart. Madam President, it's also important to recognize that at a time when the American public is most concerned about jobs and the economy, the Defense Appropriations Bill provides funds that are the source of thousands of jobs here in the United States, jobs that will be lost or at least deferred. The Secretary of the Navy has said that the combined effects of failing to fund the Defense Department will directly affect the strength of the industrial base, and that more than 10,000 private sector jobs at shipyards, factories, and Navy and Marine Corps facilities across the country will be jeopardized. Madam President, I could go on and on listing the ways that our service members and our DoD civilian workforce and the private sector contractors will be affected by our failure to act. There simply is no excuse for this Senate not to have acted last year on a defense appropriations bill. Surely we should turn our attention to focus on the needs of our military immediately, and we should heed the warning of Secretary Gates, who said, "That is how you hollow out a military, when your best people, your veterans of multiple combat operations, become frustrated and demoralized, and as a result, began leaving military service." Madam President, let's do what's most important, and let's do it now. Let's pass the Defense Appropriations Bill. Thank you, Madam President. I want to thank the ranking member of the Budget Committee, Senator Sessions, for yielding me time.
President.
Senator from Alabama.
Madam President, I want to share some remarks about the budget and would note how pleased I've been to work in this past year with the presiding officer on some legislation that I think, had we had just a couple of more votes, we'd have made progress and done something worthwhile to help ensure that our spending does not rage above our budget, as too often has been the case in our country. The fact is, the American people, by large numbers of polling data, believe we're on the wrong track. And the intelligentsia, the witnesses we've had before the Budget Committee, I'm ranking member of that committee, keep telling us we're on an unsustainable path. Witnesses called by the Democrats or Republicans, the professional CBO witnesses from all walks of intellectual and business life, say we're on an unsustainable debt path. And they're not kidding. They meant that. And the words mean something. We cannot continue what we're doing. Admiral Mullen, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, recently said, I believe that our debt is the greatest threat to our national security. If we as a nation, a country, do not address our fiscal imbalances in the near term, our national power will erode, and the cost to our ability to maintain and sustain influence could be great. He said if we do not address it in the near term, not just in the long term, in the near term. Recently, on February 17th, Secretary Geithner, the Secretary of the Treasury, appeared before the Budget Committee, and we went over the President's budget. He was, I'll have to say, more candid than was OMB Director Jack Lew, and I was asking him about the situation we're in and the effect of the budget that allows the debt to double in the next 10 years, causes the debt to do so. And he said it's an excessively high interest burden. I was asking about the fact that the money we borrow, the debt we assume, we have to pay interest on it. It's unsustainable. With the President's plan, even if Congress were to enact it, and even if Congress were to hold to it and reduce those deficits as a percentage of GDP over the next 5 years, we would still be left with a very large interest burden and unsustainable obligations over time. So I think it's pretty clear that we're on an unsustainable path, and it's pretty clear the American people are exactly correct. We're on the wrong track. We're headed the wrong way. We need to get off of that. So what is it that we've been presented with? We presented with a plan. We call it a budget, but it's really the administration's plan for what we're going to collect and spend over the next 10 years. They can plan to raise taxes, they can plan to cut spending, they can plan to increase spending and borrow more money. They can plan, that's their plan. So we got a plan, I guess, 2 weeks ago. And in that, the President told us that what my budget does is put forward some tough choices, some significant spending cuts, so that by the middle of this decade, our annual spending will match our annual revenues. We will not be adding more to the national debt. Pretty clear statement, right? It's actually a breathtaking statement to me, because I know how hard it is to do that. But he said it flatly and plainly. Our annual spending will match our annual revenues. We will not be adding more to the national debt. Jake Tapper, the ABC reporter at a White House press briefing a couple of weeks ago, asked Mr. Carney to press flack about this dramatic statement. He said, I asked him if he thought, quote, "We will not be adding to the national debt" is a statement that will withstand scrutiny. Mr. Carney? Absolutely, absolutely. Well, I don't know what world people are living in. I don't know how, are we communicating in English or some other language? This budget that's presented to us comes nowhere close to living within our means, matching expenditures and revenues, and not adding more to the debt. Look at this chart. This is the President's numbers, the numbers that have been put out here. And this is what we've been asked to pass. It's before the Budget Committee. And I wish it weren't so, what we've got. I know it's not easy to alter these numbers. I know Senator McCaskill knows that. She's looked at it. But we've got to begin to alter them a lot, I think. Look, in 2010, our total debt the gross debt of the United States was $13.5 trillion. In 10 years, under the President's budget, these are numbers in his budget document that he submitted to us, go to $26.3 trillion. Did I say billion? Trillion dollars. In 10 years. Not projecting a war, not projecting another recession, both of which I guess could occur during that time. We're living on the absolute edge. Actually, we're almost over the edge in what we're doing in spending. It's $13 trillion in new debt. And let me make this point. Not 1 year between now and 2021, the 10th year, does the annual deficit fall below $600 billion. This is an unbelievable number. President Bush was hammered. He had a $450 billion budget, his highest, and he was correctly criticized for that. The lowest that's projected over 10 years is 26.3. And last year's budget deficit was 1.3. The deficit we expect this year is going to be September 30th. When September 30th rolls around, the estimates are that the total annual deficit this year will be $1.6 trillion, the highest we've ever had in the history of the Republic. Nothing ever seen like it. And it does drop down some, as all the projections have been showing, that we'll show some drop down, but they're heading back up. In these out years, 19, 20, 21, and the budget deficits are going up each year there. So this is not a sustainable budget. It's not a sustainable path for us to be on as a nation. We cannot continue on this path. It is a great threat to us. And this week, Chairman Conrad, a very able Democratic chairman of the Budget Committee and knowledgeable and fair, has been having hearings. So we've had the Secretary of Education, the Secretary of Energy, and the Secretary of Transportation testify to us about their portion of this overall budget, this budget that would double the debt in 10 years. What do you think education is asking for? What are they asking for education? Well, think back about your states, what you've been reading about cities and school systems and county school systems and states cutting budgets, having to do for less, reducing cost, reducing teachers, reducing cost in really any way that they can. They've been doing a lot of things that they've had to do. Some of them are probably going to make that system stronger in the future, but they're not easy. You'd rather not have to make tough choices. But they're doing it all over America. Our U.S. Department of Education, however, demands an 11% increase this year, after two substantial increases the previous 2 years. I think it's 38% increase in 3 years for the Department of Education. This can't be contained. We can't have level funding for the Department of Education. We've got to have an increase of 11% and, 2% inflation? 5 times the inflation rate after 2 previous years? This is living within our means? When we're going to have next year a deficit of over $1 trillion? And energy. Came in yesterday, Dr. Chu, he wants a 9.5% increase in spending. Basically, all I can see the Department of Energy does is take money, try to mandate programs to require people to use more expensive energy and participate, I guess, with the Interior Department in locking up energy sources in the United States that we ought to be unlocking and creating jobs and prosperity and wealth for America. They need to get their act together. The price of gasoline is going up. I traveled my state last week. I'd finish a talk and the hand would go up about gasoline prices. You know, you learn something when you're out traveling around. This is on people's minds. And they don't think it's going to stop at $3.40. Senator Murkowski, chairman of the Energy Committee, former chairman, now ranking on that committee, knows more than I. And then transportation today, Secretary LaHood. Well, you got to like Secretary Hood. He's a delightful man. He believes in roads and transportation. Hold your hat. Do you know what the transportation budget is going to increase this year if the President's budget is approved? 62%. I'm flabbergasted. 62%? Is there a state in America that's showing hardly any increase in their budgets? Are we having a 62% increase? No, it's an investment in the future. An investment. Give me a break. It's spending, and debt. Well, it is a pretty serious problem we're dealing with. The Education Department needs to be doing some different things, I think. Instead of just spending money, they need to be figuring out how children learn. We've got to quit defining our commitment to education on how much money we throw at the problem, how many new buildings we build. We've got to ask, are children actually improving? Are they learning better? And too often that's not the case. Canada spends, our neighbor to the north, $7,500 per year per pupil. We spend $11,500, and they get better results. So is that an investment? It's not a good investment if we're spending more and getting substantially less. So we need a Secretary of Education to be figuring out how to help education get better, not see how much more money we can spend because we don't have the money. This year, we will spend $3.5 trillion. We will bring in income to the United States $2.2. That's almost unbelievable, but it's an absolute fact. It's undisputed. 3.5 we spend, we bring in 2.2. 40 cents of every dollar that's spent this year is borrowed. That's why the experts tell us we have a potential debt crisis. Moody's, the bond rating agency, wrote in December that a letter warning that they could downgrade our debt within the next 2 years if we don't get off this unsustainable path. So we need education to help get better education, not see how much more money they can spend. We need energy to help produce energy. They're the Energy Department. We need transportation to figure out how to use their money wisely. And just briefly, I would say all of this is about the economic health and growth and future of America. The fact is, according to the great study by Rogoff and Reinhardt, which Secretary of Treasury Geithner said he agreed with, that study has been completed, and they advise that their main finding is that across both advanced countries and emerging markets, high debt to GDP levels, 90% or above, are associated with notably lower growth outcomes. Seldom do some countries simply grow their way out of deep debt burdens. Well, their studies say that it's on average 1% less growth. Well, if you're looking for 3% growth this year and you get 2, that's a lot of difference. 3% would be a good growth. If you get 2%, you're now going to get 1 because we're being dragged down by our debt. And in addition, Mr. Geithner said this to us. Not only does he agree that it reduces growth, he says that it puts us in a position where we could more readily have a debt crisis if something happened around the world. Another debt crisis could spread here, and we could slip back into a recession. That's why we've got to do this. to create a healthy, growing economy and get this debt burden off of it, to create jobs, empower the private sector. And by the way, what percent of GDP are we? We're 94 now and are projected to be 100% of GDP by September 30th this year. Our gross debt will be 100% of GDP by September 30th this year. That puts us way into the danger zone. It's unacceptable. And what do we have from the President's budget? A budget that increases spending every year. It has its lowest annual deficit, $600 billion, which I think $600 billion would be the lowest deficit, the highest deficit ever achieved prior to President Obama becoming president. Will double the debt in 10 years, and interest on our debt will go from under $200 billion last year, hold your hat, to $844 billion in the 10th year. We will be paying interest this year, $844 billion. How much is that? People say they don't know. What does that mean? Well, the federal highway budget this year, the baseline budget, was 40. Education, I think, is 60. You see? We're going to $800 billion in interest for which we get nothing, and much of that is sent to people around the world, places like China and Saudi Arabia who are buying our bonds, and we're having to pay them interest. Not good. So we're on the wrong path. It's true. We've got to change. I appreciate the House of Representatives going to send us a continuing resolution that begins to take some steps toward reducing the dangerous path we're on. That's just a first step. We've got to do a lot more things. If we work together, we can do them, but we're going to have an effort in which all of us join together, first in recognition that we are facing a grave threat to our national security, and second, a grave threat to our economy, but one that we can meet. I've looked at the numbers. I know it's not going to be easy, but if we take the tougher path, the harder path, maybe the path less traveled, it is the path to prosperity and to a rebound in American strength and vitality. I thank the chair and would yield the floor.